Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Shannon. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Shannon, I'm really excited about the subject. It is super timely, something that I think a lot of people are really trying to figure out. But before we dive into it, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let us get to know you.
Awesome. So my name is Shannon. I live in the Boston area. I have been in marketing pretty much my whole career, but I've been in tech for the last 7-8 years. And then I moved from tech to venture capital, now back to tech. And I now own my own fractional consulting business where I work with early stage founders to define messaging, positioning, go-to-market strategy, and a bunch of other things. But typically working with folks that are under 10 million ARR in the software space.
Love it. Love it. Well, I'm super excited for the subject today. Today, we're talking about founder-led brands and how this is a big component of content marketing, how this is really this opportunity for a business to stand out nowadays. But the real question, like kind of diving into this, Shannon, is this new? Like it feels like a new trend, or has this been around? Like where did this come from and what is this?
So I think the quick answer to that is no. So I spent the first few years of my career in public relations. So what I was doing at that time was building messaging for leadership, executive presence, executive leadership. It is exactly the same thing as a founder-led brand, right? At that time, though, it was pretty sterile, very controlled, went through a PR person, was very so there was a different process, but it was still very much like, who is this person? What do they stand for? How does it align with the goals of the organization or the business? How are they the spokesperson? That would be what it was called back then, right? Now it's called the marketing, right? Like they are literally just a marketing channel now. Yep. But at the time it was very executive, communications is probably what you'd call it. And so now we've seen, this is not new, is that people buy from people, right? So you see, especially in the algorithms love people, they don't love brands unless you're like a super pithy, exciting brand. I feel like they're kind of pivoting back a little bit, but you're still seeing very much that people want to hear from people, not a logo without a personality. And so I think that's certainly not new, right? The last 5 or so years, I know it was a huge part of my job when I worked at QuickBase. So in 2018, 2019, it was starting to become really important. And now I think truly it's critical for early stage companies specifically that are really led by their founders. And especially their investors are investing in that founder as well as the business. So I think it's very not cool. New, but it is really important.
Love it. So right there at the end, you mentioned early stage companies. It's really pivotal. Why that? Why early stage? What kind of separates this and how do you really define how it can be successful for these types of companies?
Sure. So I certainly do think it can be so useful at a later stage company, but I spend a majority of my time working with founders who should have the story of the company in their DNA, right? So it actually can be a really good indicator of how successful the company is going to be if the founder is really great at building a brand for themselves. And that doesn't mean the founder needs to be outgoing, charismatic. It doesn't need to necessarily mean that. It just means that the founder has a unique and differentiated perspective on the way that they're solving a problem for their customers. And the best products have that, right? And I think you're finding now that money is not so cheap, and that you're starting to see certain products bubble up that are providing really excellent value to their customers. And those have really strong leaders that have super differentiated perspectives, right? It doesn't mean that, I think we'll probably get to this in terms of channels. I think if there's one thing to take away from this does not mean your CEO posts on LinkedIn. That is not what founder-led brands necessarily are. If you're selling MarTech, if you're selling RevTech, if you're selling HR tech, maybe, right? Because that's where those people are. Sales tech for sure. But this really just means that your founder has a unique and differentiated perspective, as I said earlier, and you're able to amplify it and distribute it on the channels in which your customers are, like wherever they are, right? So an example is I have a client that is in the vertical software space. They sell to distributors of like drywall, nuts and bolts, all of that. Like, I don't even think they know how to log into LinkedIn. Most of them don't even look at a computer during the day. So what does that strategy look like? It looks very different. It looks like events. It looks like, it's still led by your founder and not necessarily just by the brand name. So people know his or her name, but maybe even if they don't know the name of your brand, it builds a lot of affinity and trust.
I love it. So there's kind of two sides to this that I'd love to dive into. So number one is, let's say I'm a founder or an executive, and I have bought into the idea of we need to have people leading out the charge, posting about content, really sharing our opinions. If I'm someone on that executive team, how do I get started? How do I get the ball rolling? How do I build the habits that need to happen so that I can start out with this? And then after that, let's say I'm a content marketer or a marketing team, and I'm trying to convince the executive team that they need to buy in. How do I approach that? So there's kind of two sides to that, two-sided question. How do you approach the two different angles on that?
Yeah, let me start with the first one because it's easier, which is you just need to start. You need to find your channel of preference. So are you a person that loves to do podcast interviews? Are you a person that loves video, that loves to write, that likes to do, are you more of like a mathy person that actually prefers to like build spreadsheets and stuff? Like that means you're probably a short writer person. It depends. And then once you find that channel, just start writing. And doesn't mean you need to publish immediately, but just start getting things down on paper. But this is where you can start, or on video or whatever, probably not actual paper, but maybe. And then you can, this is where it actually comes into that second point of the question, which is having a really excellent, so like this was a big part of my job when I first did this, like 7 years ago, is I was a ghostwriter pretty much. So what I'd have our chief product officer just talk at me, and I would just like write. And then we'd break it up into a bunch of different, like, this could be like, it's kind of sounds like maybe you were writing a newsletter. Like you have a lot to say. So like, let's probably like, and it does seem like our corporate newsletter does well, or we know some equivalent businesses that have one, like maybe we could try that. Or it sounds like you're really good in sound bites, like really good. So like maybe we have you on a shorter form channel, and we're doing more like external outreach to get you speaking opportunities, to get you all this other stuff. So there's kind of those two things, actually, if you're able to get them both. I know you asked them as two different questions. That is like the beautiful marriage, which is like an executive team that wants to do this, and then a content team that knows it's important. If you don't, to answer like the really critical part of that second question, which is your executives don't see it's important and you know it is. If you can find one person on your executive team to start piloting this program with, what I always say is like, this will take a half hour of your time, or give me 1 hour long call and we'll have content for 2 months. Like, I just need you to give me a little bit of your time and have your content team put in the work. You have to have folks that are very good at what used to be called ghostwriting, right? Like, which is writing in their voice. So do not like take them out of it. Like, it should be very much who they are. And then starting to pilot this and starting to start to see little wins. Like, that's where we started to see all of our progress when we launched this. The first time I've launched one of these is, we're starting to see some engagement. We're starting to see some DMs come in. This was a LinkedIn program, but you can do it on other channels. And this person then got excited. They were like, because their peers are starting to see that they have a perspective. There is a lot of value in it for them as well. And then in the board slides, now, like, you have a big slide that has this person's face on it. That's like, this person literally drove business. So, hey, board, if you were thinking about replacing this exec, like, you can't. Like, they are a pillar of our content strategy, right? Like, you could, but it would be a huge hit to the business, not just from an HR perspective, but from a top of the funnel perspective, right? And so there are definitely business cases to make. And I think it's the biggest part is just saying it doesn't have to be like, I'm on LinkedIn posting 5 times a week. Or I'm super outgoing and doing a bunch of speaking opportunities. It might be like, I am a really thoughtful and critical thinker, and I want to produce a monthly newsletter that is rich with data, that has all of this like And if that's who they authentically are, and they're solving a problem for your audience, like that's where you should go. Just follow it and really like keep it there. And also they should just be excited about it. So it shouldn't feel like work to them. Because in theory, a founder-led brand is really just expanding on who your founder is. And that person should be excited by that. No, it shouldn't feel like work.
That's so cool. Well, you talked about like this cool board slide and you're starting to see some traction, things like that. One of the most difficult things marketers go through is how do we prove the ROI?
ROI. Yeah.
So when you're looking at this and you're trying to really prove out the value, the return on investment, and the overall just like the perspective of this is working versus this isn't, like, how do you look at that? How do you measure it? How do you share it? How do you look at that in general to justify the time and cost for it?
For sure. I think it's very easy on social platforms just to see reach, right? Like you see the difference in the reach of your executives versus your corporate account. So like I can say I have a client right now that it's a 10x when our executives post versus when we post on our corporate account. So that's a very easy number, right? To say, we know we're getting in front of more eyeballs. We also know we're getting DMs to them. We've never received a DM on a corporate account, right? Like, or maybe we have, but not in the time that I've been there. Yeah. So I think those are simpler. I do think there's an opportunity to say inbound interest so a lot of, if you're a company that's selling into an executive audience, I think we're all finding that number one, we all have the same persona and they're the CFO. So that's number one. Yeah. Number two is that they buy what their friends buy, right? So really getting into those professional networks of peers is so critical, right? Like that's where you're starting to see a lot of success. So if you're able to say, we're getting invites into these things, like that is like money, right? Like there's a way to see that like you're breaking into watering holes is what we used to call them, like watering holes that you could not as a brand break into before you had a founder that was really well known or another executive, right? Like I'm speaking to this, like I've done this for larger organizations that are like more like 150 million plus. And that can just be an executive, right? Like say you sell to CIOs, you should use your own CIO. You should build them up, right? So I think there are kind of different flavors of this, but I think ROI is, you don't even really need to be that creative, but I certainly think it should align with the way that you drive ROI for any of your kind of more affinity focused programs at the top of the funnel.
Love it. So outside of the fact that, and I hate to come to like a LinkedIn example, because like you said, it's not always LinkedIn.
But it's what we know,
So when you look at it and you have like a founder or an executive or someone in the business that's really doing some great content, how do you tie it back to the brand in an organic way? How do you do it so it feels authentic, but there's still the purpose of, I want to drive demand. I want people to actually engage with the business and convert into sales. How do you do that in an organic manner?
Yeah, that is an excellent question that I think is much easier to answer for a founder than it is when companies are trying to do it with their employees. I've seen this. I feel like that took off like probably 5 to 7 years ago. I know Gong is like probably the first one that really did this, which is like all of their employees were ambassadors for their brand. But then those employees leave. And in tech, they always do. Like, let's not. Yep. And so they, and then it's a little bit awkward to say, like, now I am the face of a new brand, but like, I want to make that authentic to myself. And it's a little bumpy. Mm-hmm. Like I've seen that be a little bumpy, not specifically with Gong, but like just in general. And I think with the founder, they should believe so strongly in the mission of your business that they could talk about the vision forever and the customer problem forever. Obviously, like, I don't think anyone is thinking that like the CEO of HubSpot's not going to want you to buy HubSpot. Like, obviously they are, right? Like it is literally they're a little different, but like, especially early stage, like it is literally their capital. Like it is their, so I don't think there's this like disillusionment like there can be with execs of like, there's a mix of like my personal brand, which is like Shannon Curran. And then there's a mix of my brand with the companies I work for. And it's a little mixy. Whereas like a founder, they are very much the face of their company. Very rare that they're tied to other companies. Right. And so I think it's slightly easier. But I think the most critical part is you should have very clear messaging and positioning for your business that has a flavor and personality for your founder, which is adjacent, right? It's not identical. but it is certainly adjacent. Like the pillars of the brand are similar to the pillars that your founder cares about. I love to add a third pillar typically for your founder that's just like something that they enjoy outside of work. So like, do they love mountain biking? Do they love whatever? And like gives them a little bit of like personality that is outside of work. But that's what makes it slightly different than the brand of the corporate account. But I think the good thing about the founder is they should certainly be the face. The employee situation or exec situation is a little stickier. I think it takes a little more nuance to navigate.
If you're trying to get like employee advocacy, trying to get other people involved, how do you kind of navigate some of those waters? What are at least a couple recommendations, or at least like, here's a couple red flags you should probably avoid, or things like that to kind of get everyone involved?
Yeah. So the way that I think about the employee work is very much that like every employee just shares stuff that's already canned and written by someone else, I don't think works anymore. I do think there was a time in which that worked because it just gave like visibility. So I think that certainly worked. But from my perspective, there's very few businesses that make that work now. What I do think works is finding a core team of folks in your business that have like, they may have perspectives already and assigning them like a thought leadership pillar. So this is certainly something that your audience will understand. When I go on some podcasts, I wouldn't say that, but this audience will get it. So like, say you have three like pillars of thought leadership. It's like future of the SDR, MarTech stacks in 2024 and something else. And so you assign folks like pillars and you suggest that they write, 1 to 4 posts a month about this topic. So they start to get known for it. And it's certainly a topic that your business also writes about. And then also everyone's on board to do product launches. Everyone should be like, when there's a product launch, get the assets out, give them to everybody, make a big splash. If you make a huge hire, do that together. Like there's a few things that I think are announcement-y that are fine for everyone to launch. But if you're trying to just build brand affinity and awareness, I guess I don't even really love the word awareness, affinity around certain topics, assigning them to certain people is really helpful, because also if that person does move on to a new organization, like I still care about like the way that the role of the SDR is changing, right? Like I will probably talk to my clients about that. I will talk to, so it's not necessarily like, so this is an example of, with Mad Kudu right now is like, that's a pillar of what they're discussing is like the role of biz dev. Like I still care about that, even if I wasn't an employee there, right? And I can continue to talk about it. So it feels less icky than like I'm clearly talking about the category name or like the future of this. Like it's so clearly a sell, where this is a little more like I'll announce the product launches for sure, but it's a little bit higher level and something I just care about personally.
I love that. Well, as promised, these episodes go by quick so people can consume them on the go and throughout their daily lives. Super actionable. I've learned a ton. Shannon, if anyone wants to connect and further the conversation online, how and where can they find you?
Yeah, this is very meta, but you should probably find me on LinkedIn as the founder of my own brand. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Shannon Curran. My consulting practice is called SSC Consulting. So sscconsulting.io, but it will just send you back to my LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there. Yeah. And I love talking about this stuff. If anyone's interested in exploring this, has a CEO you feel like you need to convince of this, that's something I love to do. So would love to connect with anyone.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.